Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the University of Alberta's Colloquium Series called Questions About Music. We do something rather special here, which is that instead of having an estimable guest talk to the audience, talk to the people out there on YouTube, we thought it nicer to engage the people that we want to hear from in conversation so that we can hear their voice in conversation with me, but even better in conversation with you all, because we will open up the floor for questions after we've spoken for a little bit. So the point is the conversation and the knowledge that we gain in relationship with each other. So welcome to Questions About Music, and welcome my guest, William Street, saxophonist. And I'm introducing him this way because he is known as William Street saxophonist internationally. He has played in theaters and also connected to students in pretty much all of the continents of this world, I think. But at the University of Alberta, we of course know him as our chair, Bill Street, or Bill. And the fact that you are both a teacher and a professor here and active locally, and also important and active and beloved internationally, I think is a really key part of your profile. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much for having me here. It's very nice to look out at the audience and see at least a few smiling and friendly faces. No, it's lovely to be with you today, and I know it's going to be a friendly audience. I'm here to share with you anything you want to know about me or music making that I know anything about, so you can open up any question you want.
So the theme for today is your professor's journey. And so I wanted to know how you got here, but I thought we'd address the saxophone in the room right before us, this beautiful instrument, and we will talk about this a little bit later on, exactly why this instrument is so special. But I want to know what was your first saxophone like, and how did it sound?
You mean the particular instrument?
Whatever you want to say about it.
Okay, the particular instrument I had in the beginning was one that I got from my grandmother. In fact, belonged to my uncle who died in World War II, and she wanted me to have this. And I didn't know what it was. I didn't know that it was special or not special. I just knew that it wasn't like anyone else's saxophone in the band.
Why wasn't it like? What was different?
Because everyone had brass instruments and mine was silver.
Huh.
And also the case smelled bad. Because even when I got it, it was quite an old saxophone by that time. But in fact, it was actually a Busher saxophone, which, if I'd kept it till today, is potentially a very valuable instrument.
So you've lost track of it. Who knows where it is out in the world?
I traded it in for the Music Man model, it was called.
Oh, exciting. This sounds very American to me, the Music Man. I believe that even though you have been a Canadian citizen for quite a long time and you're connected to Canada, that you originally come from another place.
Yes, I spent my early life in near Washington, D.C. in the United States. Eventually, I moved to Europe in my early 20s, and I stayed there for quite a long time, moved back to the States, and then I had an opportunity to move to Canada, took it, and I'm really glad that I did. I'm happy to be here.
I'm interested that your uncle and your grandmother were the people who put the saxophone in your hands. Can you tell us what type of music was in the air when you were growing up, both within your family and then also in your early education before you began to formally study saxophone?
Ooh, that's a good question. I've only learned a little about this I would say in the past year or something else about that. But I would say that my family had neither music nor money. They didn't have either of those things in their lives. My grandmother, who gave me this instrument, was extremely poor. She had 11 children. Her husband had died. She had no means of support other than she made tortillas and sold them to a restaurant. And that's how she supported her family.
Where did she learn to make tortillas?
Well, she was Mexican, and she learned it when she was a child.
She learned it so do you know how to make tortillas?
Of course I do, yes.
Amazing. Did you know that Bill Street knows how to make tortillas? Because, I mean, maybe we need you to do the refreshments for the next one of these.
I need to remind everybody that when we go to places where we get food and they serve you wraps, they're just raw tortillas. They are not cooked.
Yes, as we'll find out, that Bill has discriminating taste in music and now apparently in tortillas.
Absolutely.
We found out. But she clearly saw this as something of value. I mean, the thing itself.
Well, I don't know how much she knew about it at all, because there was, as far as I remember, there was no music making in my grandmother's family. In my immediate family, there was no music making. The only thing that happened in my family after I started playing was while he was ironing the clothes, he would encourage me to play whatever I was playing in front of him, which actually was kind of nice, to get a break like that. But it was just not something that they did. And strangely, my parents supported my music making until I was in my mid-20s. Whatever I thought was important to do. Good afternoon, Chris. Thank you for coming. Whatever I wanted to do, they supported. And I know that's very challenging. Not every family can support their child who has the luxury of music. However, my parents did not have the money. I don't know how they helped me with that. They did without, I'm sure.
So it's quite amazing. Do you think your grandmother had a sense that you were a musical person?
Well, I used to spend at least several weeks a summer and go to Detroit and stay with her. And one of the things I liked to do was they gave me an allowance while I was there, and I went to a music store.
Okay.
And I went to the music store and I spent all the money buying music. And I don't even know what I'm buying. I'm just going there. Anything that had the word saxophone on it, I bought. And I learned a huge variety of music just because it happened to be in that store on 7 Mile Road in Detroit.
Huh.
Yeah.
So, well, I'll go back to the 7 Mile Road store in Detroit
Okay.
because I'm interested in what types of saxophone music it would have been. But what I want to ask now is, when did you first begin to formally study the saxophone?
Okay. Well, let me finish this answer about my grandmother and music
please.
making. Out of the blue, about, I would say 2 years ago, I got an email from my cousin whose mother had died a few years ago, and she sent me 100 photographs as attachments. And I opened them up, and I'd never seen so many people making music. There was my aunt from a very early age, until she was much older, had a violin and dressed elegant. She was dressed for a concert. It was just elegant to see that. And the family obviously was doing this way back when. And this, I'm talking about probably the 1930s, something like that. And her daughter went on to become a very well-known musician as well. She, Ella Via is her name. She went to the University of Michigan. Isn't that where you went?
I did.
Yeah, and she studied violin, and she eventually got a music education degree, and then she got a job teaching in a city in northern Michigan, near where her father had built a cabin. And in that situation, she actually just put her nose to the grindstone and dug into teaching. And although she was a good player, she played string quartet throughout her entire life and still does, even though she has horrible arthritis. But what happened was that she got to be so good, she became the state of Michigan's Teacher of the Year.
Wow.
She really was an important educator.
Huh.
And she taught me how to tape that music together.
I assume that the saxophone studio knows what this means. Maybe we'll have a conversation about that later on.
They resist, but
it comes from a good transmission from a family,
It's
family
important.
skill.
It's important. Okay, get back to your question.
Yeah, so when did you begin to study saxophone formally?
So when I first started, like most people in the United States to start instruments, and I'll do this in two parts. In the United States, most people who start instruments do it in junior high school. There are a few elementary school bands and a few people that put their kids into private lessons, but mostly it's junior high school band. And that's where my father, again, they had no money. He was a part-time janitor in a school, and he met the band director of this new junior high school, which was where I was going to go to school. And he liked this guy, and they had a chat, and he thought he would be a good influence on me, and he was. I took lessons in the school from him. I stayed in contact with him until he died about 3 years ago. So,
Wow.
Until he was 90 years old.
So you have very long relationships that you foster with your teachers, I see. This seems to be something that is common.
And that would be every one of my teachers, and it's a list of, it's kind of an interesting pedigree, and we'll talk about that later. But I was going to say, in North America, that junior high school band thing is what everyone does, and it's like being on the football team, but we're less communicative, because in football you can yell. But in Europe, where I went to school later, I mean, everything is individual lessons. You're like pianist, you're isolated, and you just do on yourself what you're doing. You practice by yourself. You have your lesson by yourself in front of others all the time. Whereas here, it's so sacred. I want to have my lesson by myself in the studio with the teacher. Well, in Europe, nobody does that. And in fact, it's as they would say, non conseillé. It's not. It's ill-advised because you don't get the experience of playing in front of others. You don't hear as much repertory because in that class you hear all the pieces others are playing. So it's really an interesting way to study, which I've tried to get going here from time to time. I check with the students that I'm teaching, and if they're okay with it, I let them invite other people to come into the class to watch and even participate a little bit, which is really a great way to learn.
It sounds like it's a collaborative way of learning.
Well, at least show and tell way.
And actually, you know I'm an ethnomusicologist, so I'm interested in world traditions and transmissions of music worldwide. And it reminds me quite a bit of, for instance, Northern Indian classical traditions or Iranian classical music, where you have a lesson with everyone who's studying.
And there's a lot of modeling, I think, in those situations, because the teacher's there with their instrument as well. The student might play, the teacher might play, they might ask some comments from someone in the room, but mostly it's two people in front of others doing this, but very, very engaged.
Well, we're skipping a bit, but let me just ask you, since we're on the topic, in the traditions that I spoke about, listening before you play is a very big part of it. Listening and becoming aware of the tradition through your ears before you begin to play. How important is listening? And
junior high school bands do not listen. They put the instrument together and they honk. They just honk right away. And it's pathetic. It's really a sad way of teaching, but it's like along the way, if you don't die doing it, you get better by attrition. You lose bad things and pick up good things over a long period of time. I mean, it's not really the best way to do it. I think it'd be better to hear someone speak Chinese with a good accent and imitate that than to keep beating your head against the wall, speaking it by yourself in a room, and then never being able to. Chris, my friend, speaks Chinese very well, so I'm just getting in on that. So I think that it's really important to listening to a French accent and then speaking. This past summer, a couple of us went to France, or summer before, we went to France together as a school trip, and it was just great to see the students being involved with French people and learning not only the instrument and with the way they learn, but also be in the culture. And the culture is just so different from what we do. We had to be quiet at the dinner table when it was being served, and then we had to speak with dinner voice kinds of things. We didn't have outside voices at the table. And how many cell phones did we have at the table? None. None at the table. Whereas, here, if we see a movie today, everybody has a cell phone at the table with them. So there's a cultural difference. Meals are a bit sacred. Cultural activity with family members and close friends, a bit sacred. And with that culture of saxophone players particularly, I mean, you mentioned the worldwide stuff. I have friends worldwide because of the saxophone, and it's incredible because these are not just acquaintances. I often talk about my best friend. I mean, Julia's my best friend. Oh, no, but Jacob's my best friend. No, but Jordan's my best friend. I have so many best friends, and literally around the world, through music.
Well, demonstrably, you went through the junior high honking stage because you're not dead, you're still here with us, and you moved into university, right? So we're all at the university in undergraduate level, and you went to a university in Washington, D.C., is that right?
I went to Catholic University, but you reminded me of one thing just now. I mentioned the Music Man model of the saxophone, and the Music Man was a musical by, who wrote it?
I don't know, the 76 trombones guy.
Yeah, the guy from Iowa.
Yeah, one of those guys.
Okay,
yeah.
anyway, so this had a lot of famous tunes, like one of the most famous, Till There Was You, is from that musical, 76 trombones. There are a lot of famous songs from that. And in that cycle, I was 12 or 13 years old, and we actually played music from the Music Man, unrelated to me having a saxophone called the Music Man model, but the school band did that. But at the very end of my university career, I got one of the first jobs I got playing for money for a whole summer was playing the Music Man, the musical. And there was a theater production that was taking place in the summer theater. And the only bad part about this was a great experience. At the end of the I don't know, 6 weeks that we did this, they said, "Oh, I'm sorry, we don't have any money. We're not going to pay you."
Oh,
yeah.
no.
So, and that's what happens to lots of musicians. We lose track of we love doing it, so we want to do it, but we're not very good business people at doing it. You know, we don't negotiate like, okay, I want my money every week, or I want something up front, or, you know, there's got to be some better way to do that. And I was the only person that resisted these people, and at the end of the day, I sued them, and I got $20.
Were you happy?
Well, I actually got a lot more than that, but the lawyer took it all, and I just had $20 in the end.
Wow. So now we have Bill Street, the litigant, the tortilla maker. So you spoke a bit about how everybody is your friend, and I think we all could recognize how that would come to be. But there's one man in particular that you speak about, especially in terms of saxophone, as being your dear, dear friend. Can you tell us about this?
I will do that, but I'm going to put a prelude to that.
All right.
The friend who got me started was a man named George Duman. His real name was Eugene Duman, and they called him Gene Duman. But for me, he was Mr. Duman.
Okay.
So I got started with him, and a very dedicated teacher, and really helped me a lot. Later on, he turned me on to another teacher named George Etheridge. George Etheridge was a student of Marcel Mule. A lot of people won't know who that is, but he was a professor at the Paris Conservatory from 1942 to 1964, 68, something like that. And what he did, he was actually the founder of the modern school of classical saxophone playing. And everyone that ever studied saxophone that actually had a career doing the kinds of things that I do and some of us do here, they did it through that method, And so I studied with this man who was a student of the most famous person, okay? I didn't do that well with him. Nobody would believe this of me, but I was not a lazy student so much as not a very good student. I didn't know how to learn so well. I mean, like today, one of the things we talk about when we teach you is we talk about how we're learning this. What are we going to do and how are we going to do it? So the educational part of it is important. But back then it was kind of like see and do kinds of things. And I just didn't, I got better, but I didn't get great. And finally this teacher, George Etheridge, said, you know, Bill, I really can't help you anymore. The only thing I can think of is if you would live in France and you study with Jean-Marie Landex, if you do that, you may have a chance, but if you don't, I can assure you, you will not have a chance.
So at that point, you really didn't know how to learn. Is that the
Exactly,
issue?
yeah.
So how did that change when you went to Paris and met the man you consider?
Well, I didn't go to Paris. I went to Bordeaux, France.
Perfect.
And there, just watching around me, there were so many good players. And they were, you had to dig in, you had to practice a lot more. I mean, there we buckle down here, we say, an hour practice a day. There, we practiced 6 or 8 hours a day, every day. We practiced until our lips were sore. And when they were sore, they advised you what you could put over your teeth so that it was less sore. So, but still, we did lots and lots and lots of practice, and practice in that environment with good correction, maybe more like this. It wasn't so much do it this way or this fingering. It was more like, I'll do it. Mr. Landex was his name, Jean-Marie Landex. He did it, and then you'd have to do it again. And you'd have to pick up on what you heard. You'd have to pick up on what you saw. You'd have to pick up on any kind of stylistic things that took place. You'd have to compare with what was on the page and what was actually the thing that came out of his horn. And so there were lots of parameters. And I learned pretty quickly from that standpoint. I had to pay attention. That was the biggest thing. Pay attention. And then in that case, in those days, it was a little bit imitate. And so I studied with this teacher for a long time. And I would undoubtedly say he's my strongest influence. And I had a relationship with him for, I don't know, something like 54 years until he passed away last year. In that context, can I say something about this?
Yes.
The instrument that I play is in fact not the most current model of alto saxophone by Selmer, which makes a majority of the saxophones that classical players play. But this was actually his saxophone. And I don't know how it came about. I don't remember. At a meal somehow, we started talking about his saxophone, what was going to happen, because he hadn't played it for quite a while. And I said, well, what are you going to do? And he says, I don't know, maybe you could have it. And I said, well, I wouldn't just want to take it from you. And he said, I wouldn't give it to you. I would sell it to you.
Ooh.
And I said, I'd be pleased to buy it. And how much do you want for it? And he said, I want and I said, well, why not, 2,000 euros? And he said, it's just a figure that's a nominal figure that I want to show to my family that you purchased this from me, because there are laws in France about in your family, you can't just give away part of your estate. You have to show that you sold it or get the permission of everybody around you that you could give it away. And so he wanted it defined that this was purchased from him. And certainly he gave it to me. That's what happened.
Yes.
And it wasn't, he hadn't played it for 12 years at that point. I had it, I sent it to Japan, and I had it entirely refurbished by a man that I know in Japan who, maybe it must be an epidemic. Not long after he did this, he passed away. So it's like,
Oh dear.
Yeah.
But you've been playing it for some time now.
I've been playing it for about, how long, 4 or 5 years?
Okay, we're in the clear. That's
Yeah.
good.
Yeah, I'm so good for a while. but the thing is that not every, you can replace the pads, you can fix the corks, but it's the adjustment, knowing what you have to do to make it sound good. And this man was just so phenomenal at it. And when he wasn't doing that, he was drinking sake.
Oh, well, maybe that's why he was so good at it.
In fact, when we agreed that he was going to do this for me, we went to a sake bar, sort of a cafe kind of thing, and he must have been there so often. He had his own huge bottle, cask of sake, which was on the counter with his name on it. That's a big deal of sake.
That's amazing.
Anyway, I'm not a sake drinker, so I didn't have that, but he was delighted to be able to do it. I sent it to him, he sent it back to me, and for not even an expensive amount, I opened it out of the box and it was just perfect.
So the fact that Londex gave you this saxophone means two things. Number one, that he has a connection with you as a person, but also that he respects you as a musician. And so when I looked at his oeuvre and his published works, I saw, and I heard from friends of mine who play the saxophone, that he was really well known for laying out a systematic, he wrote the books on the saxophone, on the specific techniques that can be produced on this instrument. Can you speak a bit about that element? Because when I was reading the concert program for this past beautiful concert of a homage to Jean-Marie Londex, it was written that he was one of the first who insisted on a musical vocabulary that only could be played on the saxophone.
That's
Is
true.
that correct?
That
Can
is
you
true.
talk about that?
Now, just so I don't make you think I'm saying two things that don't agree, I said that Marcel Mühl was the founder of the modern school of saxophone. Most of the things that are published by him they're not really even arranged. They're like pieces for violin that are put into the octave that you can play on the saxophone. So they're really a collection of work of, I would say, neoclassical, they're not classical from the classical period necessarily, but they're 19th century etudes, 20th century etudes that are for violin or for flute, and cross out flute, right saxophone, take the highest notes out and put it, so it can be played. And those are the things that were known. But Jean-Marie Londex, he developed, he wasn't always like this. He was at first a great imitator of Marcel Mühl. In fact, he said that when I was 19, I was better at playing Marcel Mühl than Marcel Mühl was, because he listened so carefully. He could imitate and do exactly what Marcel Mühl did, and Marcel Mühl could only do Marcel Mühl, but Jean-Marie Londex could do. But he kept that traditional style for quite a while, and it had the hallmarks of the new modern saxophone, which was kind of a wide vibrato, but a very undulating vibrato, which came right from Marcel Mühl. But then one day, Jean-Marie said, we've got to do something that's for us. It's got to be individual. It's got to be not only written for the saxophone, it's got to be made to play on the saxophone. He compared it a lot in writings as well to music for piano. The music of Chopin, you need a piano to play Chopin's music. You can't play it on the organ, really. You can't play it on the saxophone, although I've heard that. It just doesn't work. You can't play music for flute very effectively, music for recorder on saxophone. And so he decided he wanted to ask composer friends of his to write music that was for the saxophone, based upon what he could do on the saxophone. So he made some recordings, and he sent it to numerous composers, and then they wrote pieces for him. Sometimes they're concertos, sonatas. Sometimes they're just very traditional because the person didn't do anything special, but some really pushed the boundaries of where the saxophone was at that moment and pushed it into the future. And this started in about 1970. So Jean-Marie was born in 1932, so when he was, 38 years old, he got really involved in this. And he sent one of these recordings to a man he met in Moscow. His name was Edison Denisov. We say Denisov. And this man wrote the most ingenious piece that had ever been written for the saxophone, because it was a piece that only could be played by saxophone. No, you could play some of the notes on it, on the flute, or you could play some of the notes on a cello, but you couldn't play the whole piece. You know, you could only play it on the saxophone. The second movement, it's a saxophone unaccompanied with double notes, multiphonic notes happening at the same time with, what is it called, a non-tempered scale. And but not, I mean, he can play in a tempered scale perfectly in tune as we want to be in tune. But the natural tendency of a saxophone is not to play that way. The natural overtone series has things in the high register rising and things sometimes in the low register going down. And so if you play a multiphonic note, the notes are not, perfect fifth. They're a perfect fifth plus or a perfect fifth minus. And so they're always a little bit different. But he embraced this. And so I was just looking at it yesterday. It's a piece by a man named Francois Rosset, a French composer. The same generation, he sent this recording to Denisov, and he sent one to Francois Rosset. Francois Rosset took a different view. He wrote an unaccompanied piece, which was one of the most impressive things ever done. It's a 13-minute solo piece. But I was looking at this primarily because when I heard the premiere, just by chance I was there, he was playing along. It sounded perfectly normal saxophone, and then all of a sudden there was a high note, but it's out of tune. He doesn't play out of tune. Why is it out of tune? And then it kept getting more and more out of tune. And what it was is he started using the natural harmonics of the instrument without trying to put them into a tempered scale. And so it was one of the first times that the saxophone is really what the saxophone is. Yeah, it's quite fascinating. If you get a chance to listen to the sonata by Edison Denisov, fantastic.
Put it on your playlists.
Okay, so I've deviated a little bit. So,
but
okay.
What I want to hear, I did want to say one thing, which is that I found out that Londex, in addition to writing all of the different etudes, etc., also wrote a book called Hello, Mr. Sax, The Parameters of a Saxophone, in 1989, which leads me to believe that maybe he had a sense of humor. How was he as a person?
Oh, he was tremendously.
Tell us about it.
Yeah, but he wasn't, publicly he wasn't a funny guy, but privately very funny. But it's interesting, that book, what is it called?
Hello, Mr. Sax.
That was not the title. I was working with him for at least 5 years before that, translating this book. And it was called Le Pommier à Cerise. The apple tree, which didn't have apples on it, but had cherries on it.
Oh.
So it's something that bore fruit, but it wasn't the fruit you expected it to have. And that was what the working title was for this for a long time. He never finished that. We kept saying it was that book, but in the end, when it was written, it was this other title. So.
Well, it made me laugh, but it also, even the apple tree that bore cherries, that shows an ingenious mind. So tell us not only what he was like as a person, but how your relationship developed from a teacher to student to collaborators to people who played together to finally people who called each other brothers.
First of all, I'll just correct one thing. He did write some etudes, but he didn't write many etudes. I would say there are, 25 etudes, if there are that many. And sometimes they were written for specific people. He wrote one etude for me, which had a technique that he wanted me to develop more.
Did you?
Yeah, I did. Okay. He wrote one for someone else, which developed. He wrote these individual things, and they're in a collected book that was published. And he published so many things, but it's one of the things he said, he got bored easily. I told you I practiced like 6 or 8 hours a day, and all the people around me did. He probably never practiced more than 2 hours a day. But he was the most efficient practicer ever, and he did this from the age of 7. And so by the time he was 12 years old, his technique was beyond what our university students do. It was incredible. I'm not sure if I did this here, but There's a recording that he made. I did a presentation somewhere, when I was in France just a few weeks ago. And on my presentation, I played a recording of him when he was 13 years old, playing the, what piece? Tomasi Ballade. And it's just, you listen to it and you say this is a professional in their mid-30s, 40s, or 50s, and it was a 13-year-old kid playing.
So what does efficiency of practicing mean? What allowed him to do in 2 hours what everyone else took 8 to do?
Well, you don't waste time doing things over and over again. Like, you learn basic technique. So what he did, he came from a family of musicians, unlike me. I came from a family of no musicians around me. His brother played the cello, his sister played the violin, another brother played percussion, a sister played the piano. They were all musicians in the family. And because they lived in not a tremendously large house, I've been to this house, and in that house, they had to have a special half hour or hour a day that they could practice, because they couldn't practice all at the same time. It would just be cacophony. So what happened is he had a half hour that he could practice, and when he was in practice, he listened to his sister practice the violin. And what did she play? She played Sevchek. Does anyone know what Sevchek is? Yes. Okay, Sevchek is a rudimentary, a methodical practice of patterns that take place. And he listened to that. He listened to Hannon from the piano. He listened to Czerny from the piano. All the things that his siblings were doing, he listened to that and he said, well, why doesn't the saxophone have any of these things? There are no seminal books that give us the information about how to practice or what to practice. There was not even a scale book at the time, really. And what he did is he just codified everything. He said, if we're going to do scales, we need to do every note on the saxophone from the lowest low to the highest high. We need to do it with every permutation of possibility of articulation, of dynamic, of everything that was possible. But he did it efficiently. He would play 30 minutes. He did it in 20 minutes. I never got it under 30 minutes. But he did 20 minutes of scale exercises every day, but he played every scale every day in 20 minutes, which means if you take a look at the number of notes and the amount of time it would take you to do it, you have to play, I don't know, quarter note equals 132, 2 times through the scale, and then to the next one. No stopping in between. Just that scale, that scale, that scale, that scale. And when you're done, you move to a sonata or an etude or...
The idea of him listening to the pedagogy of many different instruments, it also kind of brings us through some of the 19th century European music. I'm reminded of, the line from, is it Beethoven to Czerny to, was it Liszt after Czerny? I'm trying to remember. But the idea that so many of these composers learned from each other and were teachers. Yeah. And Marcel Muhl, and I believe he taught your teacher as well.
He did,
so
yes.
You're third in the line from him.
Yeah. But he's not the only one. I didn't say my other teacher, Frederick Hemke, who I did my doctorate with, and also one of my best friends,
There we go. Everyone's your best friend, you said.
But I'm not joking about that. Really, one of my best friends. He recently passed away, too. But he, very gifted instrumentalist, was a student of Marcel Muhl as well. He had a similar kind of... He's like one of the founders of North American saxophone playing with a strong French influence.
So would you tell us about the relationship, the human-to-human relationship that you had with Londex?
Well, it started off, I didn't speak French. Mm-hmm. I went to France. I took a train from Washington, D.C. to New York, where I was going to get a plane. The cheapest flight then was on Icelandic Air. It was like $98 to fly to Europe, round trip. Ooh. It was really cheap. Okay, but I had to get to the airport, so I had to go on by train to New York, where then I somehow got to the airport, where I took this plane. And on the way to the train station, a bunch of my friends were in the car, and as I got out of the car at the train station, a friend of mine handed me a little book, not much larger than that, and she said, "Bill, this is going to be useful." And I turned it over and it said, French dictionary. I didn't speak French. I didn't know one word of French. And so I got there and I was feeble. I had no power in the marketplace. I couldn't buy a yogurt. I couldn't buy a loaf of bread. I could have easily starved to death if there weren't kind people all around. But what came out of that is I realized soon on that I was having my lessons and my teacher spoke some English. he would have said he spoke it worse than he did, but he didn't speak very, very well. And this was a long time ago, but later on he got much better at it. But he said he tried to teach some of us in English. And I realized that all the people, the French students that were in the class, they got better and better. And the ones that were getting the lessons in English were getting better, but not as quickly and not as much. And so one day I told him, I'd like to have my lessons in French. And he said, sure, glad to do that. And I didn't understand half of the lesson in the talking part, but then when he played, then I started connecting the dots of that, what he played like, what he said around that in French, and then I started learning more about speaking French. And learning more about speaking French, I made the serious error. I just saw this on the internet yesterday. It was like, at what step do we move from vous voyez to tutoyer? Well, when do we move from the very, very formal vous to the very familiar tu? Now, I thought it was just you knew somebody for a while and you just switched over. But no, it's much more complicated than that. I'll send anybody that wants a link about this. There's a hilarious skit on the internet about this. But anyway, I didn't know the difference, and I just started tutoying him.
When you were quite young, in your 20s?
I was young in my studies. I was my early 20s as a student.
Goodness, what did he say? How did he respond?
Not a flinch. He just went with it. And it just shows you that he was very accepting. He was not critical at all. And he accepted me doing that. But of course, all of a sudden it put me in another range of friendship that, was not planned, it just happened.
So you linguistically vaulted.
Exactly, yes.
That's amazing.
And consequently, he was very friendly with me. In fact, because I was trying to speak French, somehow he embraced me. I'll say this publicly, more than the others. He was nice with everyone, he worked hard with everyone, but somehow he embraced me a little bit more. I think I'm one of the few people that he invited to his house for dinner, for example, and not just by himself, but with his family. And I met with his family just a few weeks ago in France, and they remember that day that we had dinner together the first time. So it's pretty touching. But anyway, it has a lot to do with the linguistic element. And then as we moved on, I was his student. And then as I got to be a more mature player, I went back to the United States, got a doctorate. He became my mentor. I would ask him, I'm studying with someone else, what do you think about this? I'd write letters back and forth. And by then I was writing in French, and he was writing in French. And my wife is also, she's a Francophone. She's English and French equally. And so she would help me with anything I needed help with. But he developed into a mentor for me, and he was really giving me a different side. It was a what's conseiller, someone who was just advising me, nothing particular. We talk about repertory, what pieces not to play. That hilarious story about that. One time, there's another very famous saxophone player who passed away recently. His name is Eugene Rousseau, and Eugene Rousseau came up to Mr. Londex one day and said, "Oh, that piece that you played by Guy Lecour called, well, what's the piece by Guy Lecour? It's like the Jacques Ibert Concertina da Camera written upside down. It's like he turned the notes upside down and wrote the same rhythm. It's a stupid piece." But Londex premiered the piece. And this guy came up to me and said, "Oh, I remember I was at the premiere. That was just the best piece I ever heard in my life." And he said, in his own mind, he said, "And you have no taste."
Oh, dear.
Because it's a terrible piece. And he knew it was a terrible piece, but someone had written it for him, so he agreed to play it.
Well, that's a kind soul.
And he did it in such a convincing way that a naive person thought it was a great piece by the performance, not because it was intrinsically a best piece. And that's why I've been deceived that way sometimes too. I'll hear something that's played so well, and I'll say, "Wow, that's a great piece. I've got to play that." And then I buy the music, I practice the music, I get in depth into the music, and I can't find what's there. I can't just find anything that's really great about the piece. So it's not, sometimes it's what you bring to the piece and marry it to the piece itself that makes it a work of art. It's a very delicate thing. So at this stage, we were talking, and then we started, we went on a couple trips together with large groups, and I became part of the International Saxophone Ensemble in Bordeaux, where there were 12 saxophones that played together, and we played periodically concerts at the big festivals. And he wrote a lot of the arrangements, and some pieces were original. He always wanted original, but there weren't any original things. So he actually arranged lots of pieces for an ensemble of 12 saxophones. And it's fantastic because there's a huge repertory of that now. And they're not minor pieces, they're really fantastic pieces. Well, one of the first things we did was Coriolanus Overture. Stupid piece to do that with. And he did it for one, pedagogical reason. When you play the overture to Coriolanus on stringed instruments, there's a certain way that the strings attack down bow and up bow that are or and he translated this into what we do with our tongue on the saxophone. And so he was trying, and everybody wasn't doing the same thing all the time. One person might have a hard tongue, and one person might have a very gentle tongue, and he was trying to get a blend that sounded like a real transcription, that made it not sound like a transcription, but made it sound original to the instrument, which it wasn't. So he was trying to fabricate it.
I've always been really fascinated with the versatility of saxophone players. The fact that so many of you, and everyone, does not just tenor, but baritone, or perhaps alto. And also the fact that I think Londex originally studied saxophone with a bassoon player. So the cross-fertilization between different wind instruments.
I actually know that guy.
Do you?
One of my best,
is he your friend?
One of my best friends.
So I want to play something for us to listen to, just as a way to move to the University of Alberta. We do need to open up to questions before too long, but we also are having such a good time speaking. Maybe you wouldn't mind maybe another 5 or 10 minutes? All right. So would you please play a particular piece that will bring us to the University of Alberta in terms of the the productive musical relationships here?
This is the test.
This is the test, your listening test. All right. Well, that wasn't the piece.
Okay.
But maybe we'll get it working by the end, or not.
Okay.
Either
Well,
way.
all these threads come back together. I want to say one thing. So I moved from being student to mentor to friend to colleague. We started doing concerts together where he would do a lecture, and I would play usually with Roger Admiral or sometimes with Victoria. We would do concerts, and in the course of that, there was a master class. I would share the master class with him, but of course I would defer it.
Okay, sounds good.
So I would defer to him, of course.
Yes.
So master class, concert, I would be playing the concert with Roger or with Victoria, and then there would be a lecture. The lecture was, we created a burden for ourselves. We'd go on tour and we would have lectures that he wrote. There would be 15 lectures, and people could choose which lecture they wanted on any given day. And sometimes there were 2 concerts or things a day, and so there would be 2 lectures. And in the beginning, he would speak the lecture, and I would translate it into English spontaneously. But since there were so many lectures going by all the time, so I sometimes started writing them out, but that just seemed burdensome to actually write down, translate everything word for word, because he didn't speak word for word according to the text. He would start speaking, and then he would be on another planet. And then I'd be like, that's not in my text. And so I would just then start translating, and I realized that it was a much smoother transition. You can find a lot of these on the internet, and there's a box set of 12, I think they're DVDs that are available. If you can't find them, I have some I could loan you, and you could watch them. They're on major pieces, on styles, orchestral music that incorporates the saxophone, opera that includes saxophone in the orchestration, lots of various styles, and also lots of specific pieces, the history of the piece, but also how to play the piece.
Maybe we'll go to a flash round of questions from some of the students who are in your studio, which they gave to me beforehand. So one of them is, who of all the people that you've met has made you feel most starstruck?
Jimi Hendrix.
Can you tell us more about that?
Okay, I was in my university choir, and we had an opportunity to go to New York and sing in Carnegie Hall. Now, I was a little throaty, that's the kind of singer I was, but I was part of the choir, and they let me do that, of course. And so we went to New York, and we stayed in a hotel, and I don't know where the university got the money, but we were all in individual rooms in a very nice hotel in downtown New York City, and we went out and we did stuff on certain nights. We weren't busy, we weren't in the studio, we weren't on the TV show. And I came home one night and got in the elevator, and when the elevator door opened and I looked in, it was Jimi Hendrix and the two guys in his band. And I was just like, gah, you know. And so I chatted very timidly with him, and he said, "Why don't you come to my room and we'll hang?" And so I went to his hotel room, and we sat around, and he fiddled on the guitar, and we just chatted, and it was like very starstruck.
Yeah. Did you speak about music?
Not so much other than him going, you know.
Well, I mean, that itself is amazing.
I mean, what could you say to Jimi Hendrix about music? You know?
No, I suppose that's a very good point.
Yeah.
But it does bring me to one thing that I was kind of wondering, which is you spoke about the music that you heard or that you bought when you were in Detroit, which presumably was not classical saxophone repertoire. But when we think of the saxophone, maybe more than any other instrument, we think of many different musical genres, including, you know, Charlie Parker and Coltrane and Milton Babbitt's All Set, which had a little bit of a jazz influence to it. And the saxophone is this thread throughout. How does classical saxophone fit within that saxophone ecosystem?
Well, in a store in 1965, 66, something like that, in a store in Detroit, what was available were usually it was arrangements of tunes of other things. You know, it was the book that comes to mind right away is the music of Leroy Anderson. Do you know Leroy Anderson? Leroy Anderson is from Detroit, and he wrote lots of music for the Detroit Symphony, including the syncopated clock, the He wrote the dancing typewriter. No, the name of
oh my
that
goodness!
One. The soloist is in fact a typewriter.
Yes. Oh.
He wrote what's the most famous Christmas one?
Sleigh Ride.
Sleigh Ride.
All right.
Okay.
For saxophone.
No. He wrote these for orchestra.
Yeah.
But they've been arranged for band, and in a collection, there was a collection of music by Leroy Anderson arranged for saxophone.
Interesting.
And so that's where I learned those. There was also one of music by Gershwin that I remember. That's where I first probably heard Gershwin was me playing it, you know, and not even know how to work those triplets. You know, it was a challenge for me to even play it, and I didn't have recordings then to even listen to it. So, but it was music like that I got influenced by, and it was just my grandmother and my aunt gave me a small allowance. I went there and I spent it all. I would come home and I would spend the afternoon doing this while my grandmother ironed clothes and watched her programs on TV.
Your first audience.
Los Historias.
Oh.
Las Historias. She would watch those syndicated
telenovelas.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
But somehow she didn't mind me playing in the background. I don't know how that worked, but she let me do it anyway. So I played all these tunes, and today I think back to those. That's where I first heard a lot of music. That was music that we hear. We go to the Edmonton Symphony and they play this music. It's not. You know, they'll play that music next season undoubtedly. They're very famous pieces, and the Gershwin stuff, of course. And Gershwin, you know, we think of Gershwin as one of the first people to use jazz-like things in his music. Or before that, there was what's the name of the guy with the jazz band? Who's the first incorporator of jazz into classical music?
Oh, what do we think? What's the answer? The first incorporator of jazz into classical music.
The Whiteman Orchestra.
Oh, you mean Benny?
No.
Oh, no, Whiteman, yes.
Oh, sorry.
King of
Okay.
Jazz, Paul Whiteman, King of Jazz?
Yeah.
Yes, that's quite the
Okay.
name.
But in fact, that's not. In fact, classical composer Darius Milhaud wrote jazz into his piece, The Creation of the World, in 1921, which is before these other pieces that we consider was the marriage of classical and jazz before. But in 1921, it had already been done, but it maybe wasn't played that often. Maybe that's the case. In fact, it was much later that Darius Milhaud, maybe it's just people being connected to me, he died in 1974 when I was in France in 1974. And I remember Jean-Marie walked into the class and he had a telegram from the wife of Darius Milhaud saying, "The master has passed."
Huh.
And this was just after he had actually made it, an arrangement with Darius Milhaud of The Creation of the World for a smaller ensemble.
Huh. Well, now we're kind of into the moving again from the typewriter to kind of human emotion. And so I will say that I thought that the homage, the concert that you played and our students played as well, was so beautiful. There was one piece that ended with one single note on the saxophone that went until it was almost inaudible, which I think you played, which was quite remarkable. And then there was the end piece, which I think was called a Final Bow, which ended with a very moving sound of the air rushing through the saxophones.
Yeah. The piece is actually called Final Bow, no A Final Bow. Final Bow, and it's written, it's by a French composer, but the title is in fact in English. I don't know why that was, but it was written, I was so stunned when I commissioned it, as I commissioned a lot of pieces around this time. He'd passed away and I wanted some pieces to do on this concert. I wanted to use music that he had as well, and it was at an international event with hundreds of people, if not thousands of people there at this event. And so I created an ensemble. Allison was part of it. Matthew was part of it. Kinley was part of it. I don't know where he's gone. And all these people were part of this event. And when I wrote to Philippe Geiss, a French saxophonist, composer, author, what a brilliant guy this is, he said, "I will happily write that piece." And like a week later, I got this thing and I thought, well, what can you write in a week? It's going to be trite. And he sent me, of course, a file that I could listen to, and I thought, this is going to be stupid listening to a file like that. I looked at the music and I couldn't really see much in the music. If you see, it looks like it's a few dots on the page. It doesn't look like much on the page. But when I heard the file, which was electronics, it wasn't real saxophones, I was in tears at the end. It was so emotional.
I think the whole audience was. And then the lights faded and we just saw this beautiful instrument in front of us. And I think we were all moved as a result. Maybe I'll ask the last question, which comes from one of our students, which is, what do you wish you could go back in time and tell your young self as a saxophone learner?
Pay attention. Really pay attention. As someone who wants to be a musician, listen more, but not just passively, listen actively when you do it. I think that's one thing that I see people, they have headphones on all the time, they're listening to something, but I don't know that they're really listening to something. Frank Battisti is a very well-known wind band conductor, very well-known conductor, but we know him for wind band conducting. And he arrived here to do a workshop, and he had a suitcase with his clothes and stuff in it, but he had this other suitcase he brought to class every day. It was a huge suitcase, and it was 200 CDs. And his first question to everybody is, so what are you listening to now? And it wasn't like, what are you putting on and just hearing? It's like, what are you listening to? What do you have the score to? And like it was the study of music, because he was talking about to conductors who he would hope would become lifelong learners and learn. It's not just we learn the piece, but we learn in depth everything about the piece. He's a really important person as well, Frank Battisti.
And from hearing you talking, it's not just learning and listening to music, but to language and to stories and understanding music as a human art. So
the stories are funny, and Londex always had funny stories. I don't know where he got them from, but he always had funny stories.
Well, the cherry doesn't fall far from the apple tree, I think we could say. So please thank Dr. William Street with me for the wonderful discussion with your questions. Do we have any questions for him? Yes.
You've been playing saxophone a long time. In your time practicing, what have you found has changed in your work as developing yourself as a musician, and what has stayed constant in all of your time?
What's the last part?
What has stayed constant? Like, what have you continued to do in your practice?
Okay, the thing that's changed is as I've matured as a person, my role in life has changed, and I have less time in my life. And what I found is I have to be more and more efficient in my practice, so that I have to do that 2-hour kind of practice that Londex did, rather than the banal 8 hours a day that I did, which was probably pretty inefficient. I probably played the pieces over and over again 100 times, but I probably didn't get much better at it, other than to get I would get in a sound in my head, but it probably contained lots of mistakes, lots of errors in it, even down to the detail of the punctuation of what the tongue does, or the tail of the sound, or what does that do. And so I'd learned to just pay a lot more attention to detail and to do it. The scale's a rigorous thing. At the very least, everyone should put in 20 to 30 to 60 minutes a day on the scales. If you put in that investment early on, it'll pay off for the rest of your life. It's the vocabulary of what you do. It's like learning the alphabet. If we didn't have the alphabet, we wouldn't have words. If we didn't have words, we wouldn't have sentences. If we didn't have sentences, we wouldn't have phrases. We wouldn't have paragraphs. We wouldn't have poems. We wouldn't have books. We need the alphabet to get started with. So that's a little the opposite of what we talked about last night.
Anyone else? Any other questions?
Allison?
Allison.
What attracts you to the music that you choose to play?
Ooh, good question. I don't know. I hear when I hear some piece or get a piece of music and look at it, I just see that it's something that I want. There's something about it that I can make come to life. I put my horn together and I play it, and I can imagine what this is going to be. It's like, I don't know. It's like you go to the farmer's store, the agricultural store, and you buy a bunch of packets of seeds, and these seeds are, unfortunately, the rain hit the packages and all the labels came off, so we don't know what's in any one package. And you plant all these different seeds, and you're waiting to see what's going to come up. And the ones that come up easiest, maybe not the best. The ones who come up late, maybe better. And you nurture all these things and do it. And I think that's what I like to do. I like to find something that has enough body to it that I can explore it, nurture it, and try and make it come to life.
Any other questions?
I'll ask a question.
Yes, Chris.
I'm curious, you said you came from a more or less non-musical
Yeah.
family. Why the saxophone, and especially since you focus on classical music, why not the trumpet or violin or a more popular classical instrument to begin with? And then also, because people ask me this question a lot, why did you stick with it and not just say at some point, what the hell am I doing? I'm going to switch over to one of these more conventional or mainstream instruments.
Okay, the first one's a pretty interesting question and answer. I think that financially, people that are well-to-do don't have their children play the saxophone. They have their children play the violin, the piano, or the cello, maybe the flute. But people that are poorer go with popular instruments. And the popular instruments like the saxophone, even the trumpet and the trombone to a certain extent, they out of saxophone more than the others, because there's a body of traditional music for the trumpet and the trombone. But the saxophone particularly, it's like the lowest of the totem pole. It's like you in order to get better, you've got to do more than other people. You've got to achieve more to make it better. And that, for me, that was an interesting challenge. Yeah, I didn't have the right music, so I had to get the right music. I didn't have the right techniques, so I had to get the right techniques. And I just felt like it was something I could explore. And I'm pretty much I don't know, I'm not a renegade or a loner so much. I'm pretty affable and I get along with everyone. But I think there's something about me wanting to be an individual, and that would be maybe the biggest thing. In terms of getting started, when I first started, there was kind of a choice of there are these instruments in the school program, which one do you want? Do you want the baritone saxophone? Or, mostly everyone starts on the clarinet, and I said, not starting on the clarinet. People posed that to me, and I just did not want to do it. It was just like, I don't know why I hated it. Today I love the clarinet, but back then I had an immediate affinity for the alto saxophone, and I had not even heard it so much. It was probably the physical attraction, and Jean-Marie would have talked about that as well. I think he wrote something about it in one book. The saxophone actually it's both male and female. It has a male top and a female bottom. There's an opening and a closure. And he talked about it's a complete thing that can replicate itself. And it's kind of a fascinating idea. The piano doesn't have that, nor does the violin.
I've never quite thought about things like that before.
Well, but French people, when they write, are much more poetic with banal things.
I mean, my goodness, I'm not mad at it.
Yeah.
Maybe one last question. Yes.
What's maybe a couple of your favorite memories from your time at the U of A?
Well, I'm not sure where I saw it today. It was on the poster. Every year someone takes a photograph. Early on, we didn't take so many photographs. I'm not sure why, but I probably have some in a trunk at home. But looking at these photographs, when we all come together after an event, it just really touches me. And I know every one of you in those photographs.
Well, I think we need to all see each other after we give a round of applause.
One last thing. We never know, as a group of people, who's going to contribute the most. Everybody contributes in their own way, and it's a different way. And I think that even Jean-Marie could have never predicted that I would have had a career, because I was the least good of all the students. But somehow, he was like, you don't know which of those plants is going to come up. So you have to plant a lot of plants.
Yeah,
And then nurture them all and see what grows to fruition.
that's the cherry in the apple tree.
Sure.
Well, thank you very much for talking with us.
Thank you all for coming. I really appreciate your support, as I've felt for the past 40 years. Thanks for coming, Chris.